In this presentation, we shall be looking at the application of Maqasid, the concern for the purposes of Sharia in the lives of the Sahabah of the Prophet, peace be upon him. How sometimes there was an injunction given, but Sahabah felt that the injunction would be best respected by achieving the objectives of Sharia. So we find in an interesting occurrence, the Prophet, peace be upon him, in a hadith that was mutawatir, it was narrated by many people because it was a thing that was done very publicly, asked his Sahaba after the Battle of the Trench, Khandak, to go to Banu Qurayza. And he told them to hurry to go to Banu Qurayza. And he said, do not pray Asr until you reach Banu Qurayza. On the journey, a group of the Sahaba who were traveling together, they got delayed. And Asr time had arrived before they had reached Banu Qurayza. Now what the Prophet had said was, do not pray Asr until you reach Banu Qurayza. When, however, it was time for Asr prayer, some of the companions went with the purpose of the statement of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and they understood the instruction of the Prophet to simply say, hurry up so that you are able to do Asr prayer at Banu Qurayza. Other companions or Sahaba understood the statement literally. The Prophet said, do not pray Asr until you reach Banu Qurayza, and they said, that's what the Prophet said, and that is what was meant. Because they disagreed on that, some prayed Asr at that time, others delayed until they had reached Banu Qurayza, by which time Asr prayer had already passed. Later, when they met with the Prophet, peace be upon him, and presented their dilemma to him, he said both their prayers had been accepted. In other words, the Prophet respected the opinion of those who went with the letter, but he equally respected the opinion of those who went with the purpose. Those who went with the understanding behind why he said so, not just what he said. These Sahaba were concerned about why he said so. When we look after the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, during the caliphate of Umar bin Khattab, there was a period of famine where a lot of people who were stealing would be the poorer members of society who were forced to steal because of the circumstances they found themselves in. As a result of that, the Caliph Umar put a moratorium, a suspension on the punishment for theft, the had, the amputation of the hand, because in his opinion, it would be counterproductive. It would go contrary to the objectives of Sharia to implement those rules that belonged to Sharia but belonged under tahsini circumstances, under circumstances where people weren't forced by necessity to steal. We find in a number of other instances a hadith in Sahih Muslim where the Prophet clearly said, do not collect zakat on horses. In other words, people who kept horses were not expected to pay zakat, and the government was not supposed to tax them or charge them zakat. However, at the time of Umar bin Khattab, we find that Umar decided to tax people who kept horses. And it's interesting to find out why. Was he just going against the letter of the Prophet when it was clear that the Prophet had said, do not collect zakat on horses? Or was it an issue of changing circumstances? Because while at the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, there was the need to have more horses in the Ummah was weaker, some scholars understood therefore that the original statement by the Prophet was a form of tax relief to encourage more people and not to make it difficult for people who were keeping horses. However, at the time of Umar bin Khattab, there were many people who had horses, and he realized that the amount of wealth that people made by keeping horses was even more than what people were making when they were keeping camels, and yet people who kept camels were required to pay zakat. Umar's understanding of the purpose of zakat was more about zakat being a social obligation for the rich to help the poor, irrespective of the kind of wealth that the rich were keeping. And so we find the actions of Umar not really going against the hadith of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his injunction, but protecting the spirit of that injunction, where the original injunction was no more achieving the original objective. And this is important to bear in mind, that the Sahabah were those who were the best of mujtahids. They are the ones who understood the sunnah better than generations that came after. There are a number of other instances of the Sahaba going in line with maslahah or going with the opinion of Maqasid when it came to passing judgments, and we will look at this as we move on. But it's critical to understand that the concern for the Maqasid of Sharia is not something that came later, but it's based solidly on the understanding that the objectives of law had to be achieved, and Islamic law cannot be applied where it will achieve contrary objectives. And this dates back to the time of the Sahaba of the Prophet, peace be upon him.